Every parent's worst nightmare is watching their child suffer and feeling powerless to help. When family tragedy strikes, bonds can either strengthen or completely shatter. Charles Robinson, a successful businessman, has watched his daughter Maya confined to a wheelchair for months after a devastating accident. The guilt weighs heavily as he struggles balancing his demanding career with caring for his disabled child. But Maya's nanny Rachel begins noticing something troubling. Small inconsistencies in Maya's behavior don't add up. Late-night movements when she thinks no one is watching. Forgotten limitations that seem too convenient to ignore. What Rachel discovers will force a father to confront the most painful truth, that sometimes the greatest danger to a child comes from within their own home. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the Robinson estate, filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked manicured gardens stretching toward the distant hills. Charles Robinson stood in his study, adjusting his silk tie with the practiced efficiency of a man who had built an empire from nothing but determination and sleepless nights. On his mahogany desk sat a crystal award, Business Leader of the Year, catching the light like a prism, beautiful and cold. The inscription read, "For outstanding achievement in commercial real estate development." It was his third such award in 5 years, yet today it felt heavier than usual, weighing on his conscience like an anchor. At 45, Charles carried himself with the bearing of a man accustomed to respect. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled, his charcoal suit impeccable, but if one looked closely, they might notice the slight tremor in his hands when he thought no one was watching, or the way his shoulders sagged when he believed himself alone. Success had come at a price he was only beginning to understand. The house itself told the story of his achievements. 10,000 square feet of architectural perfection in Pacific Heights, complete with a chef's kitchen that rarely saw home cooking, a library filled with books that went unread, and bedrooms that echoed with the absence of laughter. It was a monument to prosperity, but it felt more like a mausoleum these days. 6 months ago, everything had changed. The accident, if that's what it truly was, had shattered more than bones and hopes. It had revealed cracks in their family foundation that Charles had been too busy, too willful, too proud to acknowledge. His daughter Maya, once vibrant and defiant at 15, now spent her days in a wheelchair, her legs motionless beneath a soft blanket that she clutched like a security blanket. Maya had always been his greatest joy and his deepest worry. She possessed her mother's fierce intelligence and her father's stubborn streak, a combination that had led to countless battles when she was younger. Before the accident, she had been preparing for her driver's test, planning her sweet 16 party, and arguing with him about everything from curfew to college plans. Now she sat quietly, accepting his hovering attention with a patience that broke his heart daily. The transformation still stunned him. Where once stood a teenager ready to take on the world, now sat a girl who seemed to have folded in on herself, speaking in whispers and avoiding eye contact. The doctors said it was normal. Trauma did this to young minds. They assured him that with time, therapy, and patience, she would heal emotionally, even if her legs never regained function. But Charles couldn't shake the feeling that he was failing her somehow, that a better father would know how to reach through her silence and bring back his daughter's spark. Rachel Martinez arrived each morning at 7:30 sharp, her reliable Honda Civic pulling through the electronic gates like clockwork. At 32, she possessed the kind of steady presence that immediately put children at ease. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she moved through the house with quiet efficiency, bringing warmth to rooms that desperately needed it. Charles had hired Rachel through an agency that specialized in medical caregivers for children with disabilities. Her credentials were impeccable: a nursing degree, specialized training in pediatric care, and references that spoke of her extraordinary dedication to her young charges. But what struck him most during their interview was her genuine smile when Maya had wheeled herself into the room, and the way Maya's posture had relaxed slightly in Rachel's presence. Rachel lived in the guest house on the property during the week, returning to her small apartment in the Mission District on weekends to visit her own elderly mother. She had never married, dedicating her career to caring for children who needed her. There was something maternal about her that went beyond professional training, an intuitive understanding of what children needed, even when they couldn't express it themselves. Her relationship with Maya had developed slowly but surely. In the early weeks after the accident, Maya had been resistant to any caregiver, bristling at the invasion of privacy and the reminder of her dependence. But Rachel had been patient, never pushing, always offering choices and maintaining Maya's dignity even in the most basic daily tasks. She read to Maya in the afternoons, helped with physical therapy exercises that seemed to go nowhere, and most importantly, listened without judgment when Maya occasionally spoke about her fears. Charles found himself grateful for Rachel's presence in ways that went beyond her professional duties. She brought a sense of normalcy to their disrupted household, maintaining routines that gave structure to Maya's days. More than that, she served as a bridge between father and daughter, translating Maya's needs when words failed, and advocating gently for what Maya required without making Charles feel incompetent as a parent. The accident itself remained a source of haunting questions. It had happened on a rainy Thursday evening in March. Maya and her mother, Catherine, had been driving home from a therapy session, not physical therapy, but the kind that dealt with emotions and family dynamics. They had been attending sessions together for months, though Catherine had been reluctant to discuss what went on behind the therapist's closed door. The police report was straightforward. Vehicle hydroplaned on wet pavement, struck a guardrail, rolled twice before coming to rest in a shallow ravine. Catherine died instantly from impact trauma. Maya survived with what appeared to be complete paralysis from the waist down, though the medical explanation remained frustratingly vague. Sometimes, the neurologist had explained, trauma manifests in ways we don't fully understand. The spine shows minimal damage, but the neural pathways aren't responding as we'd expect. Charles blamed himself, of course. He should have been the one driving. He should have insisted on rescheduling when the weather turned bad. He should have recognized that Catherine had been struggling more than she let on, that their marriage had been fracturing in ways that affected Maya more than either parent had acknowledged. Catherine had been his college sweetheart, brilliant and beautiful but increasingly difficult in the years before her death. She had suffered from what their family doctor diplomatically called mood fluctuations, periods of intense energy followed by weeks of withdrawal and depression. Charles had thrown himself into work, telling himself that providing for his family was his primary responsibility, that Catherine's emotional needs were best handled by professionals. Now, sitting in his study with the business award, catching the morning light, Charles realized how deeply he had failed them both. Maya needed him to be present, not just provider. She needed a father who understood that success meant more than accumulating trophies and expanding his commercial real estate empire. His phone buzzed with text messages from his assistant, reminders of meetings and conference calls that once defined his sense of purpose. These days, they felt like interruptions to the more important work of rebuilding his relationship with his daughter. Yet he couldn't seem to slow down, couldn't find the courage to simply sit with Maya without trying to fix something or fill the silence with awkward conversation. Rachel had suggested family counseling, gentle hints that healing required more than physical therapy and medical intervention. She spoke of the need for Maya to process not just her disability, but the loss of her mother, the trauma of surviving when Catherine hadn't. These conversations made Charles uncomfortable. He preferred problems that could be solved with determination and resources rather than the messy, uncertain work of emotional healing. The house felt different, with Maya's wheelchair navigating the hardwood floors and Persian rugs. Charles had installed ramps and modified bathrooms, grateful for projects that felt concrete and solvable. But the silence was harder to address. The absence of teenage music playing too loudly, of friends calling, of the ordinary friction between parent and child that he now missed desperately. Maya spent her days in the sunroom, reading or staring out at the garden where she once played as a child. Rachel would often find her there in the afternoons, and their quiet conversations carried through the house like whispered prayers. Charles had learned to walk softly past the doorway, not wanting to intrude, but hoping to catch glimpses of his daughter's personality emerging from her protective shell. The future stretched before them, uncertain and daunting. Maya would need to return to school eventually, would need to rebuild her social connections and find new dreams to replace the ones lost in twisted metal and shattered glass. Charles knew that his role as father would require evolution, that the man who had conquered boardrooms and construction sites would need to learn different skills entirely. Standing in his study, surrounded by the symbols of his professional achievements, Charles Robinson made a silent promise to the daughter he was still learning how to reach. Success, he was beginning to understand, would be measured not in awards or profit margins, but in Maya's laughter returning to their home, in her trust rebuilding slowly but surely, and in their family finding a way forward together. The business award caught the light one more time as he prepared to leave for another day of meetings. But for the first time in months, Charles Robinson looked away. The discovery happened on a Tuesday evening in October, when the fog rolled in from the bay and wrapped the Robinson estate in a grey shroud that muffled sound and blurred the boundaries between day and night. Rachel had returned to the house after realizing she'd forgotten Maya's evening medication, her keys barely making a whisper as she slipped through the side entrance that led directly to the kitchen. The house felt different in the darkness, larger somehow, full of shadows that seemed to hold secrets. Rachel moved quietly through the hallway, not wanting to wake Maya if she had managed to fall asleep early. Sleep had been elusive for the girl lately, her nights filled with restless turning and quiet tears that she thought no one could hear. As Rachel approached the sunroom where Maya often spent her evenings, she heard something that made her freeze mid-step. The soft sound of footsteps, not the whisper of wheels against hardwood, but the distinct pad of bare feet moving across the floor. Her heart began to race as she processed what she was hearing, her mind struggling to reconcile the sound with everything she knew about Maya's condition. Moving closer to the doorway, Rachel peered around the corner and felt her world shift on its axis. There, silhouetted against the window overlooking the garden, stood Maya Robinson. Not sitting in her wheelchair, not propped up with assistance, but standing on her own two legs, reaching toward the upper shelf of the bookcase where her mother's journals were kept. Maya moved with careful deliberation, her movements tentative but unmistakably purposeful. She lifted one foot, then the other, balancing herself against the bookshelf as she stretched toward a leather-bound volume. Her legs, which had been motionless for 6 months, bore her weight steadily. Her spine, supposedly damaged beyond repair, curved and straightened with each reach. Rachel's medical training kicked in before her emotional response could fully form. She watched Maya's gait, noting the slight favor of her left leg, the way she tested each step before committing her full weight. This wasn't the unsteady movement of someone just regaining mobility. This was practiced, controlled. The walk of someone who had been moving in secret for some time. The realization hit Rachel like a physical blow. Maya wasn't paralyzed. Perhaps she had never been paralyzed, or perhaps the paralysis had been temporary, psychosomatic, and she had recovered without telling anyone. But why? Why maintain the deception? Why continue the elaborate charade of wheelchair dependence and medical appointments and her father's guilty hovering? Maya must have sensed a presence because she turned suddenly, her eyes meeting Rachel's across the darkened room. The girl's face cycled through emotions, surprise, fear, panic, and finally a desperate kind of resignation. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, two women separated by 20 years and united by a secret that neither had asked for. "Please," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible in the stillness. "Please don't tell him." Rachel stepped into the room, her nursing instincts warring with her emotional response. Maya remained standing, no longer reaching for the journal, but gripping the bookshelf as if it might anchor her to something solid in a world that had suddenly become uncertain again. "Maya," Rachel said softly, approaching as she might approach a wounded animal. "How long?" "How long what?" Maya's voice carried a note of defiance that Rachel hadn't heard since the early days after the accident. "How long have you been able to walk?" Maya's shoulders sagged, the pretense crumbling as tears began to form in her eyes. "I don't know, a while. Maybe from the beginning. I don't remember exactly when I realized I could move my legs again." Rachel moved closer, her mind racing through the implications. The medical records she had reviewed countless times, the doctor's reports that spoke of permanent spinal damage, the physical therapy sessions that had shown no progress, all of it took on new meaning in light of what she was witnessing. "The doctors," Rachel said carefully. "The neurologist said your spine was damaged. The MRI scans showed—" "The doctors see what they expect to see," Maya interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "And I let them. I needed them to believe it. But why?" Rachel moved to the chair across from where Maya stood, settling down to make herself less threatening. "Maya, your father is heartbroken. He blames himself. He's restructuring his entire life around caring for you." Maya's face crumpled, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "You don't understand. If he knows I can walk, he'll want to know why I pretended I couldn't. And if I tell him that, he'll know the truth about Mom, about what really happened that night." Rachel felt her chest tighten. "What truth, sweetheart?" Maya's legs finally gave out, not from paralysis, but from the weight of secrets she had been carrying alone. She sank to the floor, sitting cross-legged like the child she still was, beneath all the trauma and deception. Rachel immediately knelt beside her, her caregiver instincts overriding everything else. "She wasn't taking us home from therapy," Maya said, her words coming in rushed whispers. "We never went to therapy that night. Mom picked me up from school and said we were leaving. Not just going somewhere, leaving forever. She had suitcases in the car. She kept talking about how Dad would never find us, how we'd start over somewhere new." Rachel's hands found Maya's, squeezing gently to encourage her to continue. She was different that day, more manic than usual. She kept saying that Dad didn't love us, that he only cared about his business, that we deserved better. I tried to argue with her, tried to tell her we couldn't just disappear. That's when she started crying and driving faster. Maya's voice broke, and Rachel pulled her into a protective embrace. The girl felt so small, so fragile, despite the strength she had shown in maintaining her deception for 6 months. She said if Dad couldn't love us properly, then maybe he'd be better off without us. She said maybe we'd all be better off if we just disappeared completely. That's when I realized she wasn't talking about running away anymore. She was talking about— Maya couldn't finish the sentence. Rachel's mind reeled as the pieces fell into place. The accident hadn't been an accident at all. Catherine Robinson had been attempting a murder-suicide, and Maya had survived to carry the weight of that knowledge alone. "When I woke up in the hospital," Maya continued, "everyone kept talking about the accident, about how sad it was that Mom had died and I was paralyzed. The doctor said I might never walk again, and I realized that if I couldn't walk, then I didn't have to explain what really happened. I didn't have to tell Dad that Mom tried to kill us both." "Maya," Rachel said gently, "the paralysis, was it ever real?" "I think so at first. I think the trauma made my body shut down. But when I started getting feeling back in my legs, I pretended I didn't. It was easier than facing the truth." Rachel held the girl closer, understanding now the incredible burden Maya had placed on herself. In her 15-year-old mind, maintaining the illusion of disability was preferable to destroying her father's memory of his wife and revealing the depth of Catherine's mental illness. "Your father deserves to know the truth," Rachel said carefully. "And you deserve to heal from this, really heal, not just hide." "But what if he hates me?" Maya's voice was small and broken. "What if he blames me for Mom's death? What if knowing the truth makes everything worse?" Rachel pulled back to look Maya in the eyes. "Your father loves you more than his own life. Yes, the truth might hurt him, but continuing this lie is hurting you. And it's hurting him too, just in a different way. Maya wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture so young and vulnerable that Rachel's heart ached. I don't know how to tell him. I don't know how to stop being paralyzed. We'll figure it out together, Rachel promised, though she had no idea how to navigate the complex web of medical fraud, family trauma, and emotional healing that lay ahead. But first, I need to understand something. Your medical records, all the tests, the scans, how did the doctors miss this? Maya looked away, guilt and fear warring in her expression. I've gotten very good at not moving when people are watching. And sometimes, when I'm scared or upset, the paralysis feels real again. Like my body remembers how to shut down. Rachel nodded, her medical training helping her understand the psychosomatic component of Maya's condition. Trauma could manifest in countless ways, and the line between physical and emotional symptoms was often blurred, especially in adolescence. Maya, I need you to promise me something, Rachel said firmly. No more secrets between us. If we're going to help you heal, really heal, I need to know everything. Can you do that? Maya nodded slowly, the weight of 6 months of deception finally beginning to lift from her shoulders. Does this mean you'll help me? Even though I've been lying to everyone, especially because you've been lying, Rachel replied. You've been protecting yourself the only way you knew how, but you don't have to do it alone anymore. As they sat together in the darkened sunroom, surrounded by the fog that had become a metaphor for the secrets that clouded their lives, Rachel began to understand the true scope of her responsibility. Maya needed more than physical care. She needed someone willing to guide her through the dangerous territory of truth-telling and healing, the medical records that Rachel had reviewed so carefully over the past months would need to be re-examined, not for signs of physical damage, but for clues about Maya's psychological state. The girl's recovery would require not just physical therapy, but intensive counseling to address the trauma of her mother's attempted murder-suicide and the guilt she carried for surviving. But first, they would need to find a way to tell Charles Robinson that his daughter could walk, and in doing so, reveal the devastating truth about the woman he had loved and lost. The following days passed in a strange dance of normalcy and secrecy. Maya returned to her wheelchair each morning, performing the role of paralyzed daughter with an actress's dedication, while Rachel struggled with the weight of knowledge that felt heavier with each passing hour. She found herself watching Charles more carefully, noting the lines of worry that deepened around his eyes, the way his shoulders carried the burden of guilt that wasn't entirely his to bear. Rachel knew that understanding Maya's motivations required patience and careful questioning. She couldn't simply demand explanations from a traumatized 15-year-old who had constructed an elaborate psychological fortress to protect herself. Instead, she began creating opportunities for conversation, gentle moments where Maya might feel safe enough to reveal more of her story. On Thursday afternoon, while Charles attended a board meeting downtown, Rachel suggested they sort through some of Maya's belongings that had been hastily packed away after the accident. Maya's bedroom had been converted to accommodate her wheelchair, but boxes of her former life remained stacked in the closet like archaeological remnants of the person she used to be. We don't have to keep everything, Rachel said softly, settling on the floor beside Maya's chair. But sometimes looking at old things helps us understand where we've been. Maya's hands trembled slightly as she reached for a small wooden box that had belonged to her grandmother. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, lay a collection of items that told the story of her childhood. Ticket stubs from movies with friends, dried flowers from school dances, photographs of happier times. But buried beneath these treasures, Rachel noticed a small journal bound in soft leather, its pages filled with Maya's careful handwriting. I kept a diary, Maya said quietly, noticing Rachel's interest. Mom used to read it sometimes when she thought I wasn't paying attention. She said she was just trying to understand me better, but it felt like an invasion. Rachel accepted the journal when Maya offered it, understanding that this small act represented enormous trust. The pages revealed the inner world of a teenager struggling to make sense of her mother's increasingly erratic behavior. Early entries spoke of typical adolescent concerns: friends, school, the occasional argument with parents. But as the months progressed, a darker pattern emerged. March 8th, Mom has been crying again. She says Dad doesn't love us anymore, that his work is more important than family. I don't think that's true, but she gets so upset when I try to defend him. Sometimes I think it's easier to just agree with her. March 15th, had another fight with Mom about the summer camp I wanted to attend. She says Dad is trying to get rid of me by sending me away. I tried to explain that I actually want to go, but she started talking about how everyone abandons her eventually. She made me promise not to bring it up again. March 22nd, Mom picked me up early from school today. She seemed manic, talking really fast about how we should take a trip, just the two of us. She kept saying Dad wouldn't miss us anyway. I'm starting to get scared when she gets like this. Rachel read these entries with growing understanding and horror. Maya had been documenting her mother's deteriorating mental state without fully comprehending what she was witnessing. Catherine Robinson had been isolating her daughter, creating an us-against-him mentality that poisoned Maya's relationship with her father. She wasn't always like that, Maya said, noticing Rachel's expression. When I was little, she was the best mom. She would read to me for hours, help me with school projects, take me on adventures around the city. Dad was always working, so it was usually just Mom and me. Rachel looked up from the journal. What changed? Maya was quiet for a long moment, her fingers worrying the edge of her blanket. I think it started when I got older and began having my own opinions about things. Mom didn't like it when I disagreed with her, especially about Dad. She wanted me to be angry at him for working so much, but I understood that he was providing for us. She took that as betrayal. The journal entries from the weeks before the accident painted a disturbing picture of escalating emotional manipulation. Catherine had begun suggesting that Charles was planning to leave them, that he was having an affair, that Maya would be better off if they disappeared together. She alternated between tearful confessions of her fears and angry rants about Charles's perceived abandonment. April 2nd, Mum says Dad is planning to divorce her and send me to boarding school. She showed me some legal papers she found in his office, but I couldn't really understand them. She was crying so hard I couldn't ask questions. I don't know what to believe anymore. April 10th, Dr. Harrison thinks I might benefit from family therapy. I mentioned it to Mom, and she got really angry. She said therapists just try to break up families, that they would try to turn me against her. She made me promise not to bring it up again. Rachel paused at this entry. Dr. Harrison was Maya's current physical therapist, a kind man in his 60s who had been working with Maya since the accident. But this entry suggested he had been involved in Maya's life before the crash. Maya, Rachel said carefully, Dr. Harrison recommended family therapy before the accident. Maya nodded, her expression growing darker. I had been having trouble sleeping and some anxiety at school. The guidance counselor suggested I talk to someone. Dr. Harrison was actually our family doctor back then. He wasn't just a physical therapist. He thought family counseling might help because he could see how stressed Mom was getting. What did your father think about the therapy idea? Dad said whatever would help me was fine with him. But Mom convinced me not to tell him about the family part. She said it would hurt his feelings to know that his family needed fixing. Rachel felt the pieces of the puzzle shifting into place. Catherine had been systematically undermining Maya's relationships and manipulating her perception of reality. The suggestion of family therapy had likely threatened Catherine's control over the narrative she had created. The final entries in the journal were brief and filled with anxiety. April 18th. Mom has been talking about taking a trip, just the two of us. She says we need to get away from all the stress at home. I asked if Dad could come, and she got that look in her eyes again. The scary one. April 19th. Last day of school before spring break. Mom is picking me up early. She says she has a surprise for me. I hope it's not another one of her adventures where we end up driving around for hours while she cries. The journal ended there. The final entry written just hours before the crash that would change everything. I remember that day so clearly. Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. She was waiting outside school in the car, engine running. She had this manic energy, talking about freedom and fresh starts. I got in the car because I didn't know what else to do. Rachel closed the journal gently, understanding now the impossible position Maya had been placed in. A 15-year-old girl trying to navigate her mother's mental illness while protecting her father from painful truths had ultimately become the sole survivor of a tragedy that wasn't really an accident at all. Your mother was very sick, Maya, Rachel said firmly. What she did wasn't your fault. Not the manipulation, not the crash, not any of it. But I should have told Dad what was happening. I should have insisted on the family therapy. If I had been braver— You were a child, Rachel interrupted. You were trying to survive in an impossible situation. Your mother's illness made her see threats that weren't there and create problems that didn't need to exist. Maya leaned back in her wheelchair, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. Sometimes I wonder if she would still be alive if I had just agreed to go away with her. If I hadn't argued in the car that night. And sometimes, Rachel said gently, we survive things that others don't, and we have to find a way to live with that. Hiding in a wheelchair isn't living, Maya. It's just another kind of prison. As they packed away the journal and the other remnants of Maya's previous life, Rachel realized that helping this girl heal would require more than revealing the truth to Charles. Maya needed to understand that her mother's death wasn't her responsibility, and that her father's love wasn't conditional on maintaining painful secrets. But first, Rachel needed to find a way to approach Charles without completely destroying his world. The business award sitting on his desk, the symbol of his success and guilt, suddenly seemed like a very small consolation prize for all that he had lost, and all that he had never really understood about his own family. Rachel began documenting Maya's secret mobility with the methodical approach of a nurse recording patient progress, though this felt more like gathering evidence for a case she wasn't sure she wanted to build. She noted the times Maya stood when she thought she was unobserved, reaching for books, stretching by the window, pacing in her room during what were supposed to be rest periods. Each instance lasted only minutes, but they revealed a girl whose body was fully functional despite the elaborate pretense she maintained. The documentation felt like a betrayal, even as Rachel understood its necessity. Maya trusted her enough to drop the pretense during their private moments, sometimes forgetting to maintain the paralysis when they were alone together. During these lapses, Maya moved with the natural grace of a healthy teenager, only remembering her supposed limitations when footsteps approached or when Charles's voice echoed through the hallway. Charles returned from his latest business trip on a grey November morning, his absence having stretched to 10 days while he negotiated a complex development deal in Seattle. He came home quieter than usual, the weight of guilt seeming heavier on his shoulders. Maya's reaction to her father's return troubled Rachel deeply. The girl became noticeably more tense, her hands shaking slightly as she adjusted her blanket and carefully positioned her legs in the lifeless pose she had perfected. "Did you miss me, sweetheart?" Charles asked during their first dinner together, his attempt at warmth feeling forced and distant. "Of course, Dad," Maya replied, but her voice carried none of the genuine affection Rachel had heard during their private conversations. "How was your trip?" "Successful," Charles said, cutting his steak with mechanical precision. "The project will provide jobs for 300 people when it's completed." Rachel watched this exchange with growing concern. Father and daughter were speaking past each other, neither addressing the emotional distance that had grown between them since Catherine's death. Charles seemed to view success as a form of love, while Maya interpreted his achievements as evidence of his priorities. After dinner, Rachel helped Maya with her evening routine, noting how the girl's shoulders didn't relax until Charles had disappeared into his study. "You seem more anxious when your father is home," Rachel observed carefully. Maya's hand stilled on the book she was pretending to read. "He tries so hard to take care of me. I can see how much it hurts him to think I'll never walk again. Sometimes I think it would be easier for everyone if I really was paralyzed. Easier isn't the same as right," Rachel replied. "Your father loves you, Maya. He's struggling with grief and guilt, but that doesn't mean he couldn't handle the truth." "You don't understand," Maya said, her voice taking on an edge that reminded Rachel uncomfortably of the journal entries describing Catherine's emotional volatility. "Dad idealized Mom. He still talks about her like she was this perfect wife and mother. If he knew what she really tried to do," Rachel decided to take a calculated risk. "Maya, have you considered that your father might have known your mother was struggling? That he might have his own guilt about not getting her the help she needed?" The next morning, Rachel approached Charles as he prepared for another day of meetings. "Mr. Robinson, could we talk about Maya's emotional state? I'm concerned about her progress." Charles looked up from his laptop, irritation flickering across his features. "Dr. Harrison says her physical therapy is going as well as can be expected. These things take time." "I'm not talking about physical progress," Rachel said carefully. "I think Maya is carrying emotional burdens that are preventing her from healing properly. She might benefit from counseling." "Maya has been through enough," Charles interrupted, his tone becoming defensive. "The last thing she needs is to be poked and prodded by more doctors asking about feelings. She needs stability and care, not therapy sessions that will make her relive the accident." Rachel recognized the familiar pattern, the same resistance to emotional help that Catherine had apparently displayed, though for different reasons. Charles's refusal seemed to stem from a desire to protect Maya from further pain, while Catherine's had been about maintaining control. The breakthrough came unexpectedly when Linda Morrison, Catherine's sister, arrived for her monthly visit. Linda was everything Catherine hadn't been: steady, practical, and emotionally available. She had maintained a relationship with Maya despite Charles's initial reluctance to have reminders of his wife around the house. "I brought some photo albums," Linda told Rachel while Charles was occupied with business calls. "I thought Maya might want to see them, but I wanted to ask you first. Sometimes pictures can be difficult." The albums told the story of the Robinson family in reverse, recent photos showing the strain and distance between family members, earlier images revealing happier times when Maya was young, and Catherine's smile reached her eyes. But as Rachel flipped through the pages, a disturbing pattern emerged. In the earliest photos, Catherine appeared vibrant and engaged, holding baby Maya with genuine joy. But as the years progressed, something shifted. Catherine's smile became forced, her posture more rigid. In family photos from Maya's middle school years, Catherine often appeared slightly apart from Charles and Maya, as if she were observing rather than participating in her own life. Catherine struggled with depression, Linda said quietly, joining Rachel on the couch where they were reviewing the albums. It got worse after Maya turned 12 and started becoming more independent. Catherine had difficulty with Maya growing up, becoming her own person. "Did Charles know?" Rachel asked. Linda's expression grew complicated. "Charles knew Catherine had difficult periods, but I don't think he understood the severity. Catherine was very good at hiding her worst symptoms from him. She would have better days when he was around, then fall apart when he traveled." Maya wheeled herself into the room, her eyes immediately drawn to the photo albums. "Aunt Linda, you brought the pictures. I thought you might want to see them," Linda said gently. "But only if you're ready." As Maya looked through the albums, Rachel watched her face carefully. The girl's expression cycled through nostalgia, sadness, and something that looked like recognition, as if she were seeing patterns she had never noticed before. "Mom looked so different in the old pictures," Maya said softly. "I remember her being happy when I was little, but I had started to think I was imagining it." Linda reached over and squeezed Maya's hand. "Your mother loved you very much, but she was fighting battles that had nothing to do with you. Her illness made her see problems that weren't there and create conflicts that didn't need to exist." Rachel noticed how Maya's posture changed when discussing her mother. The same tension, The same emotional fragility that had characterized Catherine in the later photographs. The girl was unconsciously mirroring her mother's patterns, even while confined to a wheelchair. "Sometimes I feel like I'm becoming like her," Maya admitted in a whisper. "Getting upset about things that don't matter, feeling angry at Dad for working when I know he's just trying to provide for us. That's why it's important to talk about these things," Linda said firmly. "Your mother didn't have the tools to manage her emotions in healthy ways, but you can learn different patterns." When Charles returned from his calls and found them looking through the albums, his reaction was immediate and defensive. "Linda, I thought we discussed this. Maya doesn't need to be dwelling on the past." "Charles," Linda said, with the patience of someone who had had this conversation before, "Maya needs to understand her family history. Pretending Catherine didn't struggle with mental illness doesn't protect anyone." "Catherine was a good mother," Charles said, his voice tight. "She loved Maya. Whatever problems she had were serious enough that she was seeing a psychiatrist." Linda interrupted gently. "We're serious enough that she was on medication. We're serious enough that Maya lived with the stress of managing her mother's emotions." Rachel watched Charles' face as this information sank in. She could see him processing the implications, understanding perhaps for the first time that Maya had been carrying burdens he hadn't recognized. "I didn't know Maya was managing anything," he said quietly. I assumed Catherine was handling things when I was away." "Dad," Maya said, her voice small and careful, "Mom needed a lot of attention. Sometimes I felt like I had to take care of her instead of the other way around." The admission hung in the air between them, a small crack in the wall of secrets and misunderstandings that had separated father and daughter since the accident. Rachel recognized this as a crucial moment. The first honest conversation they had shared about the reality of their family dynamics. But as Charles struggled to process this new information about his late wife and daughter, Rachel knew they were still only scratching the surface of truths that needed to be revealed. Maya's secret mobility remained hidden, the real story of the accident untold, and the full scope of Catherine's final actions still locked away in Maya's traumatized memory. The photo albums lay scattered on the coffee table like pieces of a puzzle, beautiful and heartbreaking evidence of a family that had been slowly fracturing long before that rainy night in March when everything finally shattered completely. Discovery of the security footage happened by accident, though Rachel would later wonder if some part of her subconscious had been seeking exactly this kind of evidence. She had been looking for recorded proof of a break-in attempt that Charles mentioned. Nothing serious, just teenagers testing doors in the neighborhood when she accessed the home security system's digital archives. The footage from the past month revealed the ordinary rhythms of their household. Charles leaving for work, Rachel arriving each morning, delivery trucks, gardening crews. But as Rachel fast-forwarded through the timestamps, she caught something that made her freeze the playback and reverse the recording. There, captured in the infrared clarity of the night vision camera, was Maya, not sitting in her wheelchair, but walking through the kitchen at 2 a.m, moving with the careful stealth of someone who believed herself unobserved. The timestamp showed this had happened 3 nights ago, while Charles was in Seattle and Rachel was asleep in the guest house. Rachel's hands trembled as she navigated through more recordings. Maya's secret mobility wasn't limited to isolated incidents. It was a regular pattern. Night after night, the girl left her wheelchair to move freely through the house, sometimes standing at windows for long periods, other times retrieving items from high shelves, occasionally simply pacing like a caged animal, testing the boundaries of her prison. The most disturbing footage showed Maya standing in her father's study, holding his business award while tears streamed down her face. She had stood there for nearly 20 minutes, her body language conveying a grief and longing that was heartbreaking to witness. This wasn't just about maintaining a deception. Maya was torturing herself with the evidence of her father's success while believing herself to be the source of his pain. Rachel felt the weight of concrete evidence settling on her shoulders like a physical burden. The security footage was irrefutable proof that Maya had been lying to everyone, doctors, therapists, her father, and the insurance companies covering her extensive medical care. But more than that, it was evidence of a girl's profound isolation and psychological pain. The moral implications multiplied in Rachel's mind like fractals, each consideration spawning new ethical dilemmas. Maya needed help, but revealing the footage would expose the elaborate deception and potentially destroy what remained of the Robinson family's fragile stability. The financial implications alone were staggering. Charles had spent tens of thousands of dollars on medical equipment, treatments, and facility modifications based on a lie. Maya seemed to sense that something had shifted in Rachel's knowledge. During their afternoon sessions, the girl became increasingly anxious, her questions taking on a desperate edge that reminded Rachel uncomfortably of the journal entries describing Catherine's paranoid episodes. "You're looking at me differently," Maya said during physical therapy with Dr. Harrison. "Did I do something wrong?" "Of course not, sweetheart," Rachel replied, but she could hear the strain in her own voice. "I'm just concerned about your emotional state. You seem more anxious lately." Dr. Harrison paused in his examination of Maya's supposedly unresponsive legs. At 63, he had been practicing medicine long enough to recognize when something didn't align with his clinical experience. "Maya, I'd like to try some different exercises today. I want to test your reflexes in ways we haven't tried before." Rachel watched nervously as Dr. Harrison positioned Maya's legs, noting how the girl's entire body tensed with each manipulation. Maya had become so practiced at maintaining her paralysis that even involuntary responses had been suppressed. But Rachel could see the effort it required. "Interesting," Dr. Harrison murmured, making notes in his chart. "Your muscle tone is actually better than I would expect after 6 months of immobility. Have you been doing any exercises on your own?" "Just what you've taught us," Maya replied quickly, shooting a panicked glance at Rachel. The session continued with increasing tension, Dr. Harrison's questions becoming more pointed while Maya's responses grew more defensive. Rachel found herself in the impossible position of enabling Maya's deception while watching the girl's psychological state deteriorate under the pressure of maintaining it. After Dr. Harrison left, Maya wheeled herself to the window overlooking the garden, her shoulders shaking with suppressed emotion. "He knows something's wrong, doesn't he?" "Dr. Harrison cares about you," Rachel said carefully. "He wants to see you make progress. What if he tells Dad? What if he starts asking more questions?" Before Rachel could respond, Charles burst through the front door with the manic energy of someone who believed he had found a solution to an impossible problem. "Maya, Rachel, I have incredible news. They found him in the living room, laptop open, surrounded by printed research papers and medical journals." His face was flushed with excitement and hope, emotions Rachel hadn't seen from him since the accident. "I've been researching experimental treatments," he announced, pulling Maya's wheelchair closer to his makeshift command center. "There's a clinic in Switzerland that's having remarkable success with spinal cord injuries using stem cell therapy. The success rate for cases like yours is nearly 60%. Rachel felt her stomach drop as Charles outlined the treatment plan. The cost was astronomical, nearly $500,000, but Charles was prepared to liquidate investments and mortgage the house if necessary. The treatment would require 3 months in Switzerland, followed by intensive rehabilitation that could last another year. "Dad," Maya said weakly. "That's a lot of money." "Money doesn't matter," Charles interrupted, his voice thick with emotion. "What matters is giving you every possible chance to walk again. Dr. Harrison thinks you're a good candidate. Your age works in your favor, and your overall health is excellent." Rachel watched Maya's face cycle through horror, guilt, and desperation as her father described the sacrifices he was willing to make for a recovery that she had already achieved in secret. The girl was trapped. Revealing the truth now would mean admitting to months of deception that had cost her father enormous emotional and financial resources. "I need to think about it," Maya said finally, her voice barely audible. Of course, Charles replied, mistaking her hesitation for fear of disappointment. It's a big decision, but sweetheart, this could change everything for us. That evening, Rachel found Maya in her room, staring at the ceiling with the exhausted expression of someone who had been fighting a losing battle for too long. He's going to sell everything for a treatment I don't need, Maya whispered. How do I tell him that? How do I explain that I've been lying for months while he's been destroying himself with guilt? The same way you tell anyone a difficult truth, Rachel replied. One word at a time with love and courage. What if it breaks him? What if knowing the truth about Mom and about me is more than he can handle? Rachel sat on the edge of the bed, choosing her words carefully. Your father is stronger than you think, but more importantly, he deserves the chance to prove that. You've been protecting him from truths he has a right to know. The introduction of Dr. Elena Vasquez came at the worst possible time, though Rachel would later recognize it as exactly the intervention they needed. Charles met Elena at a medical conference where she was presenting research on trauma-induced paralysis in adolescents. She was a child psychiatrist who specialized in psychosomatic disorders, conditions where emotional trauma manifested as physical symptoms. She's brilliant, Charles told Rachel over dinner. His enthusiasm infectious despite the complicated circumstances. Her research suggests that many cases of trauma-induced paralysis resolve naturally once the underlying psychological issues are addressed. Rachel felt a chill of recognition. What kind of psychological issues? Guilt, primarily. Children who survive accidents that kill parents often develop conversion disorders, physical symptoms that serve as self-punishment for surviving. Dr. Vasquez has had remarkable success treating these cases. Maya had grown very quiet during this conversation, her knuckles white as she gripped her water glass. Rachel could see the girl processing the implications of her father's words, understanding perhaps for the first time that her elaborate deception might have been unnecessary, that there might have been other paths to healing that didn't require lying to everyone she loved. I'd like Maya to meet Dr. Vasquez, Charles continued. Not as a patient necessarily, but Elena specializes in family dynamics affected by trauma. She might have insights that could help us all heal. As Rachel helped Maya prepare for bed that night, the weight of secrets and missed opportunities hung heavy in the air between them. The security footage on the hard drive represented irrefutable evidence of Maya's deception, while Dr. Vasquez's expertise offered a potential path toward healing that none of them had previously considered. The longer we wait, Rachel said gently, the harder this becomes for everyone. Maya nodded, tears flowing freely for the first time in weeks. I know. I just don't know how to stop being broken when everyone needs me to be broken. Maybe, Rachel suggested, the first step is understanding that being broken and being healed aren't the only options. Maybe there's something in between, being honest about the process of healing. The house settled into nighttime quiet around them, but Rachel knew that sleep would be elusive. Tomorrow would bring new complications, more questions from Dr. Harrison, and Charles's continued planning for a treatment that Maya didn't need. The truth was becoming harder to contain, pressing against the walls of deception with increasing force. The letters surfaced during what should have been a routine cleaning of Catherine's former office, a room that Charles had avoided since her death, but finally decided to convert into a library for Maya. Rachel was helping sort through desk drawers when her fingers encountered a manila envelope taped to the underside of the bottom drawer, hidden with the deliberate care of someone who wanted to ensure the contents would only be found by accident or after death. Inside the envelope were dozens of letters, all written in Catherine's distinctive handwriting, but never sent. The dates spanned the final 2 years of Catherine's life, and as Rachel read through them, a chilling portrait emerged of a woman whose mental illness had metastasized into something far more dangerous than anyone had realized. My dearest Maya, one letter began, I know you think your father loves you, but love isn't measured in gifts or college funds. Real love means being willing to sacrifice everything for the people you care about. Would your father sacrifice his precious business for you? Would he choose you over his success? I already know the answer, and so do you. Rachel's hands trembled as she continued reading. The letters revealed the sophisticated manipulation Catherine had used to isolate Maya from Charles, creating a narrative of abandonment and competition that existed only in Catherine's deteriorating mind. If you ever betray our bond by choosing him over me, another letter read, you'll understand what real abandonment feels like. I've lost everyone I've ever loved to their selfish ambitions. I won't lose you too, even if it means we have to leave this world together. The final letter was dated just 3 days before the accident, and its contents made Rachel's blood run cold. Maya, by the time you read this, you'll understand that sometimes the people who love us most are the ones who have to make the hardest decisions. Your father will never put us first. His business, his reputation, his success, they'll always matter more than our happiness. I've tried to protect you from this truth, but I can see you're starting to choose his side. If I lose you to him, I'll have lost everything that matters in this world. Sometimes the only way to keep the people we love safe is to take them somewhere they can never be hurt again. Rachel sank into Catherine's desk chair, the weight of understanding crushing her chest. This wasn't just emotional manipulation. These letters documented Catherine's plan to murder Maya and herself, presented as an act of love and protection. Maya had been living with a suicidal, potentially homicidal mother who had convinced herself that killing them both was preferable to losing control of her daughter. When Maya wheeled herself into the office and saw Rachel reading the letters, her face went ashen. "You found them," she whispered. "How long have you known these existed?" Rachel asked, her voice carefully controlled despite the rage building in her chest. "Since right after the accident. I came looking for Mum's jewelry to wear to the funeral, and I found them." Maya's hands shook as she reached for one of the letters. "I read them all. That's when I realized that what happened in the car wasn't really an accident." Rachel felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with sickening clarity. "Maya, these letters, they prove that your mother was planning to kill you. This isn't love, sweetheart. This is severe mental illness. But she did love me." Maya protested, her voice taking on the defensive edge that Rachel was beginning to recognize as learned behavior. "She was just scared of losing me. She was trying to protect me from getting hurt by Dad's priorities." "Maya, listen to me carefully," Rachel said, moving closer to the wheelchair. "Your mother was very sick. These letters show someone who had lost touch with reality. Threatening to kill you isn't protection. It's abuse." Maya's composure finally cracked, her sobs echoing through the office as months of suppressed grief and confusion poured out. "But if she was wrong about Dad, if he really does love me, then why did she die? Why did I survive? Why do I feel guilty for being glad she's gone?" Rachel pulled Maya into her arms, understanding now the impossible psychological burden the girl had been carrying. Maya had survived an attempted murder-suicide, felt relief at her mother's death, and then convinced herself that she deserved to be paralyzed as punishment for those feelings. "You survived because you were meant to survive," Rachel said firmly. "And feeling relief that someone isn't hurting you anymore doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you human." The emotional weight of the letters was compounded by new stress in the household. Charles had been spending more time with Dr. Elena Vasquez, their professional consultation evolving into something that looked increasingly like a personal relationship. Maya's reaction to this development was complex and painful to witness. "It's only been 8 months since Mom died," Maya said after Elena joined them for dinner for the 3rd time that week. "How can he already be interested in someone else?" Rachel recognized the echo of Catherine's possessiveness in Maya's response. "Your father isn't replacing your mother, Maya. He's trying to heal from his grief. People heal in different ways. Mom always said Dad would move on quickly if something happened to her. She said successful men don't stay alone long because they need someone to manage their personal lives while they focus on business. Your mother's illness made her see threats that weren't real," Rachel replied, but she could see Catherine's poisonous words taking root in Maya's mind, creating new anxieties about her. father's motivations. The situation became more complicated when Maya overheard Charles discussing his financial situation with Elena. The expensive experimental treatment in Switzerland, combined with business setbacks from spending too much time away from work, had put serious strain on the family's resources. "I've been neglecting my responsibilities," Charles told Elena during a conversation Maya wasn't meant to hear. "My partners are questioning my judgment, and I've lost 2 major contracts because I haven't been fully present. But Maya comes first. She'll always come first." Maya's guilt multiplied exponentially. Not only was she maintaining an elaborate deception about her paralysis, but her father was literally destroying his career and financial stability to provide treatment she didn't need. The weight of this knowledge became almost unbearable. Rachel began to see signs of what she recognized as conversion disorder. Maya's guilt and trauma were manifesting in episodes where her paralysis seemed to become psychologically real. During times of extreme stress, Maya would genuinely lose sensation in her legs, her body's way of protecting her from emotional pain by making the deception unnecessary. "Sometimes I can't feel my legs even when I want to walk," Maya confided during one of their private sessions. "It's like my body remembers how to be broken when my mind gets too scared." Rachel realized they needed professional help, but Maya's terror of therapy created another obstacle. Catherine's manipulation had convinced Maya that therapists were enemies who would destroy families by forcing people to reveal uncomfortable truths. "What if Dr. Vasquez asks questions I can't answer?" Maya worried. "What if she figures out that I've been lying about everything? What if she helps you figure out how to tell the truth in a way that heals instead of hurts?" Rachel countered. The breakthrough came when Maya finally trusted Rachel enough to reveal the complete truth about the night of the accident. They were alone in the house, Charles having taken Elena to dinner, when Maya's emotional dam finally burst completely. "Mum didn't just try to kill us in the car," Maya whispered, her voice so quiet Rachel had to lean in to hear. "She had been planning it for weeks. She showed me sleeping pills she had been saving, told me about peaceful ways to leave this world together. The car crash was her backup plan when I refused to take the pills." Rachel felt her world tilt as the full scope of Catherine's illness became clear. This wasn't just a moment of crisis. It had been a calculated plan to commit murder-suicide when her emotional manipulation failed to maintain complete control over her daughter. "Maya, you were in mortal danger. Your mother wasn't capable of keeping you safe. She was the primary threat to your safety. Surviving that situation required incredible strength and intelligence. But I lied to everyone afterward. I've been lying for months. You protected yourself the only way you knew how," Rachel replied. "But protection that requires hiding from the people who love you isn't sustainable. You deserve to be known and loved for who you really are, not for who you pretend to be." As they sat together in the quiet house, surrounded by the evidence of Catherine's psychological deterioration, Rachel made a decision that would change everything. Maya needed more than her support. She needed professional intervention from someone who understood trauma and family dynamics. And Charles needed to understand the truth about his wife's illness and his daughter's survival. "Maya," Rachel said carefully, "I think it's time we talk to Dr. Vasquez, not as your father's friend, but as a professional who might be able to help us figure out how to heal from all of this." Maya's fear was palpable, but for the first time since Rachel had discovered the truth, she saw something else in the girl's eyes: hope. "Do you think she would understand? Do you think she could help me tell Dad the truth without destroying him?" "I think," Rachel said, "that we're about to find out." The letters lay scattered across Catherine's desk like evidence of a crime that had taken months to solve. Tomorrow, Rachel would begin the process of helping Maya reclaim her life from the shadows of her mother's illness. But tonight, for the first time since the accident, Maya fell asleep without the weight of absolute secrecy crushing her chest. The confession came on a December evening when fog rolled in from the Pacific like a grey curtain. muffling the sounds of the city and creating the kind of intimate isolation that sometimes allows truth to surface after months of careful burial. Charles had taken Elena to a medical conference in Portland, leaving Rachel and Maya alone in the house that had become both sanctuary and prison. Maya had been agitated all day, her carefully maintained composure cracking under the pressure of Elena's increasing presence in their lives. During dinner, she had barely touched her food, her hands trembling as she moved vegetables around her plate in patterns that made no nutritional sense. "She's going to figure it out," Maya said suddenly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them like a taut wire. "Dr. Vasquez, she's going to ask questions that I can't answer." Rachel set down her fork and studied Maya's face. After months of careful observation, she had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated when the girl was approaching her breaking point. "What questions are you afraid she'll ask?" "About the accident, about Mom, about why I'm not getting better." Maya's voice carried the weight of secrets that had grown too heavy to bear alone. "She's a psychiatrist, isn't she? She specializes in trauma in children. Dad thinks I don't know, but I heard him talking to her about my case." Rachel felt a chill of recognition. Elena's expertise in psychosomatic disorders wasn't coincidental. Charles had been seeking professional guidance for Maya's emotional state without realizing how precisely that expertise applied to their situation. "Maya," Rachel said carefully, "what exactly are you afraid Dr. Vasquez will discover?" The question hung in the air between them, and Rachel could see Maya wrestling with the weight of months of deception. The girl's hands moved to her legs, covering them with the blanket she used like armor against the truth. "I need to show you something," Maya whispered finally. "But first, I need you to promise that you won't hate me when you understand what really happened." Rachel moved closer, her nursing instincts recognizing the signs of someone preparing to reveal trauma that had been carefully guarded. "Maya, nothing you could tell me would make me hate you. Nothing." Maya reached into the drawer of the side table beside her wheelchair and withdrew a manila folder that Rachel had never seen before. With shaking hands, she pulled out a document that made Rachel's breath catch, the official police report from the accident, complete with detailed diagrams and witness statements. "I requested a copy of this report 3 months ago," Maya said, her voice barely audible. "I told them I needed it for insurance purposes. But really, I needed to see what the police understood about what happened that night." Rachel accepted the report with trembling hands, scanning the technical language and measurements that reduced a family's tragedy to clinical observations. But as she read more carefully, inconsistencies began to emerge that challenged the narrative they had all accepted. "Maya, this says the car accelerated before hitting the guardrail. The skid marks suggest your mother wasn't trying to brake. She was pressing the accelerator." "I know," Maya whispered, tears beginning to flow freely. "I remember now. She wasn't trying to avoid the crash. She was aiming for the deepest part of the ravine." The truth came out in fragments, like pieces of broken glass that Maya had been carefully collecting for months. Catherine hadn't lost control of the car in a tragic accident. She had deliberately steered them toward what she believed would be their deaths. A final act of control disguised as protection. She kept talking while she drove, Maya continued, her voice growing stronger as the secret finally found release. "She said Dad would never really love us the way we deserved. She said his business partners were more important to him than his family. She said if we couldn't have his complete attention, then maybe it was better if we just disappeared." Rachel felt her understanding of the Robinson family's tragedy reorganize itself around this new information. Catherine's suicide attempt hadn't been impulsive. It had been planned, calculated, and presented to Maya as an act of love. "I tried to grab the steering wheel," Maya said, her hands moving unconsciously as if reliving the moment. "I screamed at her to stop, told her that Dad did love us, that she was wrong about everything. That's when she looked at me with this expression I'd never seen before, like she was disappointed that I couldn't understand what she was trying to do for us." "Maya," Rachel said softly, "do you remember the impact? Everything went black when we hit the guardrail. When I woke up in the hospital, everyone was talking about the accident, about how tragic it was that Mom had died while we were coming home from therapy. I started to tell the doctor what really happened, but then I heard Dad crying in the hallway. Maya's voice broke as she described listening to her father's grief, hearing him blame himself for not being more present, for not recognizing that Catherine needed help. He kept saying that if he had been a better husband, Mum would still be alive. If he had been a better father, maybe I wouldn't have needed therapy. I couldn't tell him that Mom had tried to kill us both. Rachel began to understand the psychological mechanism that had created Maya's paralysis. The girl had absorbed her father's guilt while carrying the traumatic knowledge of her mother's attempted murder-suicide. Her body had shut down as a way of protecting everyone from truths that seemed too devastating to reveal. The paralysis, Rachel said gently. When did you first realize you could move your legs again? I think I always could, Maya admitted. Sometimes in the hospital, I would move my feet under the blankets when the nurses weren't looking. But every time I thought about telling someone, I would remember Mum's face in the car and my legs would stop working again. Rachel felt the pieces of Maya's psychological puzzle clicking into place. The girl's paralysis was real when her trauma was triggered, psychosomatic when she felt safe, and performed when she needed to maintain the protective fiction that kept her family's secrets buried. Maya, your mother was very sick. What she tried to do wasn't love. It was the action of someone whose mental illness had become dangerous. You survived because you fought back, because you were stronger than her illness. But I'm glad she's dead, Maya whispered, the words torn from her throat like a confession of the deepest sin. I know I'm supposed to miss her and grieve for her, but mostly I just feel relieved. Does that make me a terrible person? Rachel pulled Maya into her arms, understanding now the enormous burden of guilt and relief that the girl had been carrying. You're not terrible. You're a survivor. And being relieved that someone isn't hurting you anymore is a normal, healthy response. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of Charles's key in the front door. He'd returned early from Portland, and Rachel could hear him moving through the house with the distracted energy of someone who had important news to share. Maya. Rachel, I have something to discuss with both of you, Charles called from the living room. Rachel and Maya exchanged a look of panic and determination. The police report lay between them like evidence of a crime that had taken months to solve, and Rachel realized that the time for careful truth-telling had passed. Charles needed to understand what had really happened to his family, and Maya needed to be freed from the prison of protective lies she had constructed. Should we tell him? Maya asked, her voice small but steady. Should we tell him everything? We should tell him the truth, Rachel replied. All of it, starting with the fact that you can walk. As they heard Charles approaching the sunroom, Maya made a decision that would change everything. With trembling determination, she pushed herself up from her wheelchair and stood on legs that had been hidden in plain sight for 8 months. Dad, she called, her voice carrying through the house with new strength. I need to talk to you about Mom, about the accident, about everything. Charles appeared in the doorway, just as Maya took her first visible steps since the night that had shattered their world. His face cycled through shock, confusion, and a dawning understanding that nothing he believed about his family had been entirely true. Maya, he breathed, his voice filled with wonder and growing horror. How long? When did you... I need to tell you about the night Mom died, Maya said, walking toward her father with steady determination. I need to tell you what really happened in the car. Rachel watched as father and daughter faced each other across the space that had been filled with secrets and protective lies for 8 months. In Maya's hands, she still held the police report that would transform Charles's understanding of his wife's final actions and his daughter's survival. The truth was finally ready to emerge, but Rachel knew that revelation would be only the beginning of their healing. Maya's paralysis had been both symptom and shield, protecting the family from knowledge that seemed too painful to bear. Now they would all need to learn how to live with reality instead of the comfortable fiction that had sustained them through the worst of their grief. Outside, The fog continued to roll in from the ocean, but inside the Robinson house, the long darkness of secrets was finally beginning to lift. The alliance between Rachel and Dr. Elena Vasquez formed gradually, built on shared concern for Maya's welfare and growing recognition that the girl's healing required more than either woman could provide alone. Elena's expertise in adolescent trauma and Rachel's intimate knowledge of the family dynamics created a partnership that would prove essential for navigating the dangerous territory ahead. Their first private conversation took place in Elena's downtown office, a space designed to put young patients at ease with soft lighting and comfortable furniture that didn't feel clinical. Rachel had requested the meeting under the pretense of seeking guidance for Maya's emotional state, but she came prepared to reveal far more than Charles knew she possessed. "Maya's paralysis concerns me," Rachel began carefully, watching Elena's expression for signs of professional recognition. Not the physical aspect, the emotional component. She seems to be using her disability as protection from something. Elena leaned forward, her dark eyes attentive and compassionate. "Tell me what you've observed." Rachel made a calculated decision to trust Elena with part of the truth. "I've seen Maya display mobility when she thinks she's unobserved. Brief moments, but enough to suggest her paralysis isn't entirely physical." Elena nodded slowly, unsurprised by this revelation. Psychosomatic paralysis isn't uncommon in adolescents who've experienced trauma. The body creates symptoms that serve a psychological function, usually protection from emotional pain or guilt. "What would Maya need protection from?" Rachel asked, though she suspected Elena already had theories. Survivor's guilt is the most common cause. Children who survive accidents that kill parents often develop conversion disorders, physical symptoms that punish them for surviving. The paralysis becomes both penance and protection. Rachel felt a chill of recognition at how precisely Elena's assessment matched Maya's situation. "How would you treat something like that?" "Very carefully," Elena replied. "The paralysis serves a function until the underlying trauma is addressed. Forcing premature mobility without proper psychological support can be psychologically damaging." Over the following weeks, Rachel and Elena worked together to create a safe framework for Maya's eventual disclosure. Elena provided professional guidance while Rachel served as Maya's trusted advocate, ensuring that any therapeutic intervention prioritized the girl's emotional safety over dramatic revelation. Maya's growing trust in the therapeutic process surprised everyone, including herself. Elena's approach was gentle but persistent, creating space for Maya to explore her feelings about the accident without forcing immediate disclosure about her mobility. "I have dreams about the car," Maya told Eleanor during one of their sessions, with Rachel present for support. "Sometimes I'm trying to grab the steering wheel, and sometimes I'm just sitting there letting it happen." "In the dreams where you try to grab the wheel, how do you feel?" Elena asked. "Guilty. Like I should have tried harder. Like maybe if I had been stronger or smarter, I could have saved her." Elena made notes in her assessment file, documenting the classic symptoms of survivor's guilt alongside Maya's self-imposed paralysis. Her professional evaluation would become crucial evidence for helping Charles understand his daughter's condition. "Maya," Eleanor said gently, "in your dreams, where you don't try to grab the wheel, how do you feel then?" Maya was quiet for a long moment, her hands gripping the arms of her wheelchair. "Relieved," she whispered finally. "And then I feel terrible for feeling relieved." Rachel watched Elena process this admission, recognizing the skilled way the psychiatrist was helping Maya acknowledge feelings she had been unable to express. The therapeutic framework was working, creating safe space for truths that had been too dangerous to voice alone. Charles's resistance to Elena's professional insights created significant obstacles for their careful planning. Despite his romantic interest in Elena, he struggled to accept her clinical observations about Maya's psychological state. "Maya doesn't need therapy," he insisted during a dinner conversation that Rachel observed from the kitchen. "She needs medical treatment and support. She's been through enough without having to relive the trauma with a psychiatrist. Charles, Elena said patiently, trauma that isn't processed doesn't disappear. It manifests in other ways, sometimes physical symptoms, sometimes behavioral changes. Maya's emotional healing is as important as any physical recovery. Catherine always said therapists made problems worse by digging up things that were better left buried, Charles replied, his voice taking on a defensive edge that Rachel recognized as learned behavior. Elena's expression sharpened with professional interest. Catherine was resistant to therapy? She tried it briefly years ago, but said it made her feel worse rather than better. She preferred handling things privately, within the family. Rachel felt the pieces of Catherine's manipulation falling into place. The woman had not only isolated Maya from professional help, but had poisoned Charles's perception of therapeutic intervention, creating barriers that persisted even after her death. Elena's professional assessment of Maya's condition became a crucial document for planning their revelation to Charles. Written in clinical language but accessible to lay readers, it outlined the psychological mechanisms behind conversion disorders and provided a framework for understanding Maya's behavior. Patient presents with classic symptoms of trauma-induced conversion disorder. Elena wrote in her evaluation, physical paralysis appears to serve protective psychological function, likely related to survivor guilt and unprocessed grief. Premature intervention could exacerbate symptoms, while supportive therapy combined with family education offers excellent prognosis for full recovery. The assessment provided language for explaining Maya's condition in terms that Charles could understand and accept. More importantly, it established Elena's professional credibility for the difficult conversations that lay ahead. Rachel found herself preparing emotionally and practically for potential upheaval that might cost her job and disrupt the family relationships she had come to cherish. Maya's revelation would expose months of deception that some people might view as enablement rather than protection. What if Dad fires me? Rachel asked Elena during one of their planning sessions. What if he thinks I've been part of the deception rather than trying to help Maya heal? Then we'll make sure he understands your role in Maya's recovery, Elena replied firmly. You've been protecting a traumatized child while trying to facilitate her healing. That's exactly what a good caregiver should do. Maya's first attempts at visible physical movement during therapy sessions required careful choreography to avoid triggering panic while building her confidence. Elena suggested starting with small exercises that could be explained as reflex testing, gradually increasing Maya's comfort with revealing her capabilities. I want you to try moving your toes, Elena said during a session with both Rachel and Charles present. Don't worry about results, just focus on the intention. Maya's hesitation was visible as she weighed the risk of exposure against her growing trust in Elena's guidance. Slowly, deliberately, she moved her toes inside her shoes, a tiny gesture that represented enormous courage. Charles leaned forward eagerly. Did you see that? Did her toes move? Reflexive responses aren't uncommon, Eleanor said carefully, protecting Maya from premature pressure while acknowledging the progress. The important thing is that Maya feels safe exploring what her body can do. The family's financial crisis added urgency to their timeline for revelation. Charles's business problems had escalated beyond what he had initially revealed, and the cost of Maya's unnecessary medical care was accelerating toward financial catastrophe. The Swiss clinic requires a $50,000 deposit, Charles told Elena during a conversation that Maya and Rachel overheard from the next room. I'll need to liquidate my retirement accounts. But Maya's future is worth any sacrifice. Rachel watched Maya's face crumble with guilt as she listened to her father planning to destroy his financial security for treatment she didn't need. The weight of deception had become unbearable, creating a crisis that demanded resolution regardless of the emotional risks involved. We can't wait any longer, Rachel told Elena after Charles left for another desperate business meeting. Maya is destroying herself with guilt, and Charles is destroying his future for a lie. We need to tell him everything, Elena nodded gravely. I agree, but we need to plan this carefully. Charles will experience this revelation as a form of betrayal, not just Maya's deception, but his own failure to recognize his wife's mental illness and his daughter's psychological needs. The decision to confront Charles with all the evidence at once, Maya's mobility, the police report, Catherine's letters, and Elena's professional assessment, represented a calculated risk that could either heal the family or shatter it completely. Maya's growing strength and determination to face her fears became the foundation for their final planning. During a private conversation with Rachel, the girl demonstrated a resolve that would have been impossible months earlier. "I want to walk to Dad when I tell him the truth," Maya said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was proposing. "I want him to see that I'm okay, that I can be okay, before I tell him about Mom." "That's very brave," Rachel replied, understanding the symbolic importance of Maya literally standing up to deliver the truth. "I'm tired of being afraid," Maya continued. "I'm tired of protecting everyone from things they have a right to know. Mom taught me to keep secrets, to protect people's feelings, but the secrets are hurting everyone more than the truth ever could." Rachel reflected on her own role in the family's journey toward healing, recognizing that her position as caregiver had evolved into something more complex and emotionally significant. She had become Maya's advocate, Charles's supporter, and a bridge between their fractured relationship. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Rachel said, "you won't face it alone. Elena and I will help you through whatever comes next." As they prepared for the confrontation that would change everything, Rachel felt the weight of responsibility and love that had grown over months of caring for a family in crisis. Maya was no longer just her patient. She had become the daughter Rachel had never had, while Charles had become a man whose healing mattered deeply to her own sense of purpose. The stage was set for a revelation that would test every relationship in their carefully constructed household. But for the first time since the accident, Rachel felt hopeful about their prospects for genuine healing. The truth, however painful, offered possibilities that deception had made impossible. Tomorrow, they would learn whether love and trust could survive the weight of secrets that had protected them all from facing the full scope of Catherine's illness and Maya's remarkable survival. The confrontation began on a Saturday morning in January, when winter light filtered through the windows of the sunroom like a blessing and a judgment combined. Charles sat at his desk, reviewing financial documents for the Swiss clinic, his shoulders bearing the weight of a man prepared to sacrifice everything for his daughter's future. Rachel approached, with Elena's professional assessment in her hands, her heart pounding with the knowledge that the next few minutes would either heal their family or destroy it entirely. "Mr. Robinson," Rachel said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal, "I need to discuss Maya's condition with you. There are things about her situation that you need to understand." Charles looked up from his paperwork, irritation flickering across his features. "Rachel, I appreciate your concern, but Dr. Harrison and the specialists have been very clear about Maya's prognosis. The Swiss treatment represents our best hope for—" "Maya isn't paralyzed," Rachel interrupted, the words falling between them like stones into still water. "She hasn't been paralyzed for months, possibly since the beginning. Her condition is psychological, not physical." The silence that followed stretched taut as Charles processed what he had heard. Rachel watched his face cycle through disbelief, confusion, and the first spark of anger that would soon become a raging fire. "That's impossible," he said finally, his voice carrying the controlled calm of a man rejecting an unacceptable reality. "I've seen the medical reports. Dr. Harrison has documented her condition extensively. You're not qualified to make that kind of assessment." Rachel placed Elena's professional evaluation on his desk, the clinical language providing authority for her claims. "Dr. Vasquez has been working with Maya. This is her assessment of Maya's psychological condition. Maya has been experiencing conversion disorder. Her trauma manifested as physical paralysis that served to protect her from emotional pain she couldn't process." Charles scanned the document, his hands trembling slightly as the implications became clear. "You're saying Maya has been lying to me? For 8 months, she's been pretending to be paralyzed while I've been—" His voice broke as he realized the scope of resources and emotional energy he had invested in a medical fiction. "She's been protecting herself," Rachel said firmly, "and protecting you from truths about the accident that she believed would destroy you." "What truths?" Charles demanded, rising from his chair with the controlled fury of a man who felt betrayed by everyone he trusted. What could possibly justify this level of deception? Before Rachel could respond, Maya's voice carried from the doorway, clear and strong in a way Charles hadn't heard since before the accident. "The truth about what Mom tried to do to us. Dad, the truth about why she died and why I survived." Charles spun around to face his daughter, who stood in the doorway without her wheelchair, balanced on legs that he had believed would never function again. The sight of Maya, upright and mobile, hit him like a physical blow, forcing him to grip the edge of his desk for support. "Maya," he breathed, his voice filled with wonder and growing horror. "You're standing. How long have you been able to walk?" Maya stepped into the room with careful determination, each movement representing months of courage, finally finding expression. "I need to tell you about the night Mom died, Dad. About what really happened in the car." Charles's legs gave out, and he sank back into his chair as Maya approached. Rachel positioned herself supportively nearby, ready to intervene if the emotional weight became too much for either father or daughter. "The accident wasn't an accident," Maya said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "Mom didn't lose control of the car. She aimed for the guardrail. She was trying to kill us both." The color drained from Charles's face as Maya's words rearranged his understanding of his wife's death and his daughter's survival. "That's not possible. Catherine loved you. She would never—" "She was sick, Dad," Maya interrupted, moving closer to her father with each revelation. "Really sick in ways none of us understood. She had been planning to hurt us for weeks. She thought if she couldn't have complete control over our family, then it was better if we all just disappeared." Rachel watched Charles struggle to process information that challenged everything he believed about his marriage and his wife's mental state. She could see him cycling through denial, bargaining, and the first stages of a grief that would be more complex than anything he had experienced after Catherine's death. "I have proof," Maya continued, pulling the police report from her pocket. "The evidence was always there, but nobody wanted to see it. Mom accelerated into the crash. Dad, she wasn't trying to save us. She was trying to end us." Charles accepted the police report with shaking hands, his eyes scanning the technical details that supported Maya's devastating claims. "Why didn't you tell me this before? Why let me believe? Because I heard you crying in the hospital," Maya said, tears flowing freely now. "I heard you blaming yourself for not being a better husband, for not recognizing that Mom needed help. I couldn't tell you that she had tried to murder your daughter. I couldn't destroy your memory of her along with everything else." Rachel stepped forward as Charles began to weep, understanding that he was grieving not just for his wife, but for the illusion of their marriage that had sustained him through the worst of his loss. "Maya has been carrying this burden alone, trying to protect you from pain while processing her own trauma. The paralysis was her way of making sense of surviving something that was meant to kill her. But the deception," Charles said through his tears, "the months of medical care, the financial cost, were the price of a 15-year-old girl trying to protect her father from devastating truth," Rachel replied firmly. "Maya chose to sacrifice her own mobility rather than destroy your last connection to Catherine. That's not betrayal, that's love." Maya knelt beside her father's chair, her movement graceful and natural despite months of pretending otherwise. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm sorry for lying, for making you spend money we didn't have, for letting you blame yourself for things that weren't your fault. I just didn't know how to tell you that Mom tried to kill me, and that part of me was glad when she died instead." Charles pulled Maya into his arms, holding her with the desperate intensity of a man who had just realized how close he had come to losing everything that mattered. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I'm sorry I didn't see how much pain you were in. I'm sorry I didn't protect you from having to carry this alone." Rachel felt her own tears flowing as she witnessed the first moments of honest communication between father and daughter since the accident. Maya's first visible steps had carried her not just across the room, but across the chasm of secrets and misunderstanding that had separated them for 8 months. "Can you forgive me for lying?" Maya asked, pulling back to look at her father's face. "Can you forgive me for not seeing?" Charles replied, his voice breaking with emotion. "For not understanding that you needed help processing this trauma instead of expensive medical treatments?" As father and daughter held each other in the winter light streaming through the windows, Rachel understood that the hardest part of their healing was just beginning. They had revealed the truth, but now they would need to learn how to live with it, how to rebuild their relationship on a foundation of honesty rather than protective deception. Charles's breakdown came not all at once, but in waves of realization that crashed over him as the full scope of his failures as a father became impossible to deny. He sat in his chair holding Maya, his successful businessman's composure completely shattered, as 8 months of misdirected energy and misplaced guilt reorganized themselves into a more terrible truth. "I failed you," he whispered against Maya's hair, his voice raw with self-recrimination. "I failed you and I failed your mother. I was so focused on providing financially that I missed everything else. I didn't see Catherine's illness getting worse, and I didn't see that you were carrying trauma that was destroying you from the inside." Maya pulled back to look at her father's face, seeing clearly for the first time the depth of pain he had been carrying alongside his guilt. "Dad, you didn't fail us. You did what you thought was right. You worked so hard to give us a good life, but what kind of life was it really?" Charles interrupted, his hands trembling as he tried to process the magnitude of what he was learning. "Your mother was planning to kill you, and you felt so alone with that knowledge that you convinced yourself paralysis was preferable to telling me the truth. What does that say about the kind of father I was?" Rachel moved closer, recognizing that Charles was approaching a psychological crisis that could be as damaging as the family's months of deception. "Mr. Robinson, you're not responsible for Catherine's mental illness, and you're not responsible for the impossible situation Maya found herself in after surviving her mother's attempt at murder-suicide." Eleanor entered the room at that moment, having been called by Rachel when the confrontation began. Her professional presence brought a sense of stability to the emotional chaos that threatened to overwhelm them all. "Charles," Elena said gently, settling into a chair near the family group, "what Maya has told you about Catherine's actions aligns with everything I've observed about her psychological state before her death. This wasn't a failure of your marriage or your parenting. This was a severe mental illness that became dangerous." Charles looked up at Eleanor, his face streaked with tears and disbelief. "How did I not see it? How did I miss the signs that my wife was planning to hurt my daughter?" "Because Catherine was very skilled at hiding her worst symptoms from you," Eleanor replied with professional compassion. "People with severe depression and psychotic features often present differently to different family members. She may have genuinely experienced periods of stability when you were present, while struggling with dangerous thoughts when she was alone with Maya." Maya took her father's hands in hers, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of what she was revealing. "Dad, Mom was good at making me feel like I was the only one who could understand her, like telling you about her problems would hurt you. She made me feel responsible for protecting you from her illness. That's classic emotional manipulation," Elena added. Catherine wasn't consciously trying to harm Maya, but her illness created patterns of behavior that isolated Maya and made her feel responsible for managing an adult's mental health crisis. Charles felt the architecture of his assumptions about his family crumbling and rebuilding itself around this new understanding. So, when Maya survived the crash and felt relief that Catherine was gone, she felt guilty for having a normal, healthy response to being freed from an abusive situation. Elena finished. The paralysis served multiple psychological functions. It punished her for surviving when Catherine didn't. It gave her an excuse to avoid discussing the accident. And it provided a concrete way to express psychological trauma. Rachel watched this exchange with growing hope, recognizing that Elena's professional framework was giving Charles language for understanding his family's crisis without destroying his capacity for healing. The psychiatrist's presence had transformed what could have been a devastating revelation into the beginning of genuine therapeutic work. "I want to help you heal from this," Charles said to Maya, his voice gaining strength as he found his footing in this new reality. "I want to learn how to be the kind of father who creates space for truth instead of making you feel like you need to protect me from painful realities." Maya's relief was visible as she heard her father accept responsibility for changing their family dynamics rather than simply absorbing guilt for past failures. "I want that too, Dad. I want us to be honest with each other, even when the truth is difficult." Rachel felt her own emotional response threatening to overwhelm her professional composure. Watching this family begin to heal felt like witnessing a miracle, but it also forced her to confront her own role in their future. "I need to ask something difficult," Rachel said, her voice careful and measured. "I've been complicit in Maya's deception for months. I understood that she was lying about her paralysis, and I chose to support her rather than immediately revealing the truth to you. Mr. Robinson, I need to know if you can trust me to continue caring for Maya after this betrayal." Charles looked at Rachel with an expression that mixed gratitude with understanding. "You didn't betray me, Rachel. You protected my daughter when she needed protection, and you helped her find the courage to tell me the truth when she was ready. That's exactly what I would want from someone who cares about Maya." Elena nodded approvingly. Rachel's approach was therapeutically sound. Forcing premature disclosure could have been psychologically damaging for Maya. She needed time to develop trust and coping skills before revealing trauma of this magnitude. Maya stood up and walked to Rachel, embracing her with the natural affection of a daughter seeking comfort from a mother figure. "Rachel saved my life," she said simply, "not just by keeping my secret, but by helping me understand that I deserve to heal instead of just hide." The embrace between Maya and Rachel became a symbol of the family they had chosen to become rather than the one genetics had given them. Charles watched this interaction with growing recognition that Rachel had become more than an employee. She had become the maternal presence that Maya needed to navigate her healing. "I want you to stay," Charles said to Rachel, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just as Maya's caregiver, but as part of our family. Maya needs you, and frankly, so do I. I need to learn how to be a better father, and I think you can help teach me." Elena smiled at this development, recognizing the formation of a chosen family structure that could provide the stability and support that Maya needed for her continued healing. "Family isn't just about genetics," she observed. "It's about people who choose to love and support each other through difficult times." As the four of them sat together in the sunroom, where so many secrets had been kept and finally revealed, Rachel felt the weight of deception lifting from the household like fog clearing to reveal a landscape they could finally navigate together. "So what happens now?" Maya asked, looking around at the three adults who had committed to helping her heal. "Now we learn how to be a family based on truth instead of protection," Charles replied. "We learn how to communicate honestly, even when it's scary. And we learn how to support each other through the hard work of healing from trauma." The family embrace that followed, Charles, Maya, Rachel, and Elena forming a circle of support and commitment, represented not an ending, but a beginning. They had finally assembled the pieces of their shattered family into a new configuration that could support the weight of truth and the possibility of genuine healing. 6 months later, the morning sun cast the same long shadows across the marble floors of the Robinson estate. But everything else had transformed in ways that would have been impossible to imagine during the darkest days of their deception. Charles stood in his study, not reviewing business documents but looking at a new family. portrait that occupied the place of honor where his business award had once sat. The photograph captured them on Maya's 16th birthday. Charles and Eleanor, Rachel and Maya, all gathered around the kitchen table, where they had shared countless meals as their chosen family took shape. Maya's smile in the picture was genuine, reaching her eyes in a way that spoke of hard-won peace and the freedom that comes from living without secrets. Maya's progress in both physical and emotional therapy had exceeded everyone's expectations. Though Elena was careful to remind them that healing from trauma wasn't linear, there had been difficult days when Maya's anxiety returned, moments when her legs would temporarily lose function as her body remembered old patterns of protection. But these episodes became less frequent as Maya learned to trust that she was safe and loved, regardless of her emotional state. The interesting thing about psychosomatic symptoms, Elena had explained during one of their family therapy sessions, is that they disappear when they're no longer needed. Maya's paralysis served a crucial function when she wasn't ready to face certain truths. Now that those truths are in the open and being processed, her body doesn't need to protect her in that way. Charles's transformation as a father had been perhaps the most remarkable change in their household. The businessman, who had once measured success in awards and profit margins, now scheduled his days around Maya's therapy appointments and school activities. He had restructured his company to require less travel, delegating responsibilities that he once believed only he could handle. I spent so many years thinking that providing financially was the same as providing emotionally, he told Rachel during one of their evening conversations. I thought if I could give Maya and Catherine a beautiful home and financial security, that was sufficient expression of love. I never understood that presence is a prerequisite for intimacy. Rachel's role in the family had evolved from caregiver to something far more complex and meaningful. The legal papers that officially made her Maya's guardian in case of emergency sat in Charles's safe, but the emotional reality was that she had become Maya's chosen mother in every way that mattered. Her small apartment in the Mission District remained officially her residence. But her real home was wherever Maya felt safe and loved. I never thought I would have a family, Rachel confided to Elena during one of their regular conversations. I spent so many years caring for other people's children, always knowing I would eventually have to say goodbye. But Maya chose me as much as I chose her. That kind of mutual selection creates bonds that genetics alone can't explain. Dr. Vasquez's integration into their family had happened gradually. Her professional relationship with Maya providing the foundation for personal relationships with both Rachel and Charles. Her expertise in family trauma had proven invaluable not just for Maya's healing but for helping Charles understand the psychological dynamics that had shaped his marriage to Catherine. Catherine's illness wasn't your fault, Eleanor had told Charles during one of their private sessions. But understanding how it affected your family dynamics helps you make different choices going forward. Maya needs a father who can hold space for difficult emotions rather than trying to fix or avoid them. Maya's return to school had required careful planning and support, but her natural intelligence and resilience had served her well in reconnecting with peers and academic challenges. She had chosen to be honest with close friends about her experience, finding that sharing her story created deeper connections rather than the isolation she had feared. I used to think that if people knew the truth about my family, they would see me as damaged or weird, Maya told Rachel as they prepared for her first day back at school. But keeping secrets made me feel more isolated than telling the truth ever could. Most people have difficult family stories. They just don't talk about them. Charles's business had not only recovered from the financial strain of Maya's unnecessary medical care, but had actually grown stronger as his new priorities attracted clients who valued his more balanced approach to success. He had discovered that being fully present in fewer projects yielded better results than spreading himself thin across multiple ventures. Success looks different now, he told his business partners during a meeting that Rachel observed. It's not just about profit margins or expansion. It's about building something sustainable that allows time for the relationships that give life meaning. The family's new traditions reflected their commitment to open communication and emotional honesty. Sunday dinners had become occasions for sharing both celebrations and concerns, creating regular opportunities for difficult conversations before they became crises. Maya had instituted truth time during these gatherings, moments when any family member could share something they had been hesitant to discuss. "I'm proud of us," Maya said during one recent Sunday dinner, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had learned to trust her own worth. "We figured out how to love each other without keeping secrets. That's harder than most people realize." Rachel's reflection on their journey often brought her to tears, not of sadness but of gratitude for the unexpected gift of belonging that had emerged from their shared crisis. She had entered their lives as a professional caregiver and had become something she never imagined possible. A woman with a daughter who chose her daily, a man who respected her wisdom, and a sense of purpose that went beyond any job she had ever held. "I used to think courage meant taking care of other people," Rachel wrote in the journal she had started keeping. "But I've learned that the greatest courage is allowing other people to take care of you, accepting love without trying to earn it through service." Alone, Maya's newfound ability to speak about her trauma had surprised everyone with its healing effect not just on her but on everyone who heard her story. She had begun volunteering with a support group for teenagers who had experienced family trauma, finding that helping others process similar experiences strengthened her own healing. "Secrets make us sick," Maya told a group of younger teens during one of her volunteer sessions. "Not just keeping them, but believing that we have to keep them to protect other people. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for someone we love is to trust them with difficult truths." As evening approached and the family gathered for dinner, Rachel looked around the table at faces that had become more precious to her than any relationship she had ever imagined. Charles reached for Elena's hand while discussing his day. Maya shared a story from school without any trace of the anxiety that had once defined her social interactions, and the conversation flowed with the ease of people who had learned to trust each other completely. The new family portrait on Charles's desk captured more than just their physical presence. It documented their choice to love each other honestly, to support each other through difficulty, and to create a family based on commitment rather than obligation. The image would remain in that place of honor, not as evidence of achievement, but as a reminder of what becomes possible when people choose courage over comfort and truth over protection. Outside, the fog was beginning to roll in from the Pacific, but inside the Robinson house, the long darkness of secrets had been replaced by the warm light of transparency and love. They had learned the hardest lesson families ever face, that healing requires the courage to be known completely, and that love grows stronger when it doesn't have to compete with lies for space in the heart. In the end, their hidden truth had become their greatest gift, not the secret itself, but the courage required to reveal it, and the love that proved strong enough to survive complete honesty. They had become more than a family. They had become proof that chosen love can heal even the deepest wounds when people commit to facing difficult truths together.